Commerce, Manufacturing, and Trade will come to order. Chair will recognize himself for 5 minutes for the purposes of an opening statement. And good morning, and I want to welcome everyone to today's hearing on Representative Guthrie's bipartisan legislation, H.R. 985, the Concrete Masonry Products Research, Education, and Promotion Act of 2015. This measure authorizes the establishment of a national checkoff program for concrete masonry products and directs the Department of Commerce to provide administrative oversight support throughout the implementation of the program. Many of us are familiar with the advertisements from checkoff programs that support agricultural commodities such as beef, it's what's for dinner, and the incredible edible egg. A unique component of these programs is that they are established at the request of a particular industry and are financed by that industry as well. Manufacturers and producers of a commodity agree to pay an assessment, which is then pooled to support a more efficient, coordinated marketing approach aimed at strengthening the market position of the commodity in the United States and in foreign markets. In addition to marketing and advertising expenditures, these funds are also used to finance research and development ventures that help advance modern product lines and other innovative uses of the commodity in question. Today's hearing on H.R. 985 will give the subcommittee an opportunity to examine the status of the concrete masonry products industry in the United States and abroad, and to learn about the effectiveness of past and current research, educational, and promotional activities taken by the industry. The hearing will give us an opportunity to examine the potential benefits from the advancement of concrete masonry products in the marketplace. We will also examine the potential impact on other industries competing in the building material space. Additionally, I look forward to understanding how the Department of Commerce would fulfill its administrative and oversight role. I want to thank Representative Guthrie for the efforts to create this bipartisan bill that seeks to grow the economy, create jobs, and protect consumers. I would ask witnesses for their indulgence this morning as the full committee has legislation on the floor of the full House this morning, and some members may be in and out during the amendment process on the Cures bill. So I thank the witnesses in advance for their testimony and look forward to an engaging discussion on this legislation, and I would be happy to yield to Mr. Guthrie if he has comments he wishes to make this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having this hearing, and I want to thank everybody for being here today and pleased to support H.R. 985. This is an issue that my colleagues and I have worked on for 3 years, and I would especially like to thank my friend from Florida, Congresswoman Kathy Castor, who's worked very hard on this effort. The bill is truly bipartisan with over 160 co-sponsors, and I'm sure that just about every member of this subcommittee, maybe every member of Congress, has heard from concrete masonry producers or contractors in their respective districts. Most of these businesses are small, locally owned, and so they are greatly entwined with their communities and would stand to benefit greatly from this program. H.R. 985 is a bipartisan approach to creating a commodity research and education program and will allow for nationwide cooperation and accelerated job growth. By allowing block producers to pool their resources, these local manufacturers will have a way to improve their products, resulting in increased energy efficiency and safety and increased marketing options. I want to thank the subcommittee chairman for bringing this important legislation before the subcommittee, and I encourage my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back to the chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the subcommittee ranking member, Ms. Schakowsky of Illinois, for 5 minutes for an opening statement, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing on H.R. 985, the Concrete Masonry Products Research, Education, and Promotion Act. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on this legislation. Let me apologize at this point. I am going to leave for a very short time to go to the floor on an amendment that I'm proposing. Commodity checkoffs have been used for decades to support the sales and improvement of many products. So far, all of those programs have been overseen by the USDA or Department of Energy, from got milk to cotton, the fabric of our lives. We are all familiar with these programs and the products they promote. With the creation of softwood lumber checkoff, other building materials industries like hardwood lumber and natural stone have made efforts to create their own checkoff program, seeking parity with other building materials. H.R. 985 would create a concrete masonry checkoff program at the Department of Commerce. Over the past few years, I've heard regularly from the concrete masonry industry contractors, workers, and my colleagues about the importance of a checkoff program. Just yesterday, I met with a constituent named Jim O'Connor who has worked tirelessly to advance this bill. Advocates stress that a checkoff would support jobs, improve the quality of concrete products, and reduce adverse environmental impacts of concrete production. I'm very interested in pursuing these goals, and I look forward to hearing from the industry representatives about how this legislation would get us there. I also want to make sure that the Commerce Department, which has never managed a checkoff, has the resources and know-how to oversee this kind of program. I want to learn from the Government Accountability Office about the pitfalls of checkoffs and how those can be avoided. And I want to understand the perspective of those representing other building materials. I look forward to hearing the testimony of our non-concrete industry witnesses today to better understand those issues. I think we all share the same objectives: to grow jobs, improve the quality and safety of the building materials we use, and heighten consumer awareness. I want to make sure that this legislation is successful in leveraging all of those benefits while limiting any negative impacts that might be anticipated. I know that my colleagues share that goal. Again, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair, thanks the gentlelady. The gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes the Vice Chair of the full committee, Ms. Blackburn, for the purposes of an opening statement. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses for being here and giving their time. Checkoff programs, we all know how they've worked. We are curious about expanding this to the concrete industry and how this is going to work to help with jobs growth and with industry development. Now, interestingly enough, when I was in the state Senate in Tennessee in the late 90s, I worked with a group in the concrete industry in our state to help found the Center of Excellence at Middle Tennessee State University. And it was the first such center that we had in the South, and it has been so highly successful. I was pleased to serve as the graduation speaker for the first graduating class from the concrete industry management program. We continue to see the benefits of this, and I think as you look at the advancement in this industry, the safety of materials, the options in concrete, in these materials, that having a checkoff program works just hand in glove with what we see from the MTSU program. So I welcome you all. I'm going to have a couple of questions for you. As the gentlelady from Illinois said, we have legislation from this committee on the floor this morning. So we're going to be up and down. So we ask for your understanding in that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair thanks the gentlelady. Seeing no other members seeking time for an opening statement, that will conclude opening statements. Chair would remind members that pursuant to committee rules, all members' opening statements will be made part of the record. And now I want to thank our witnesses for being here today and taking the time to testify before the subcommittee. Again, today's subcommittee hearing will consist of two panels. Witnesses on each panel will have the opportunity to give an opening statement of 5 minutes, followed by a round of questions from members. Once we conclude with questions on the first panel, we will take a brief recess to set up for the second panel. Our first panel today consists of two witnesses. Mrs. Ellen Herbst, the Chief Financial Officer and Assistant Secretary for Administration, the United States Department of Commerce. Good morning. Thank you for being here. And Mr. Franklin Rusco, Director of Natural Resources and Environment Energy Issues at the United States Government Accountability Office. We'll begin our first panel with Ms. Herbst. You're recognized for 5 minutes for an opening statement, please.
Thank you. And good morning, Chairman Burgess, Ranking Member Schakowsky, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify today on proposed legislation to establish a commodity research and promotion program, also known as a checkoff program for concrete masonry products. I'm Ellen Herbst. I am the department's CFO and Assistant Secretary for Administration. I oversee the establishment and execution of departmental policies and procedures for administrative functions affecting program operations in Commerce's operating units. In my role, I seek to strengthen the department's capacity to achieve its objectives, maximize return on program investments, and deliver quality and timely service. As part of the administration's economic team, the Secretary of Commerce serves as the voice of all U.S. business. Department of Commerce promotes job creation, economic growth, sustainable development, and improved standards of living for all Americans by working in partnership with businesses, universities, communities, and our nation's workers. The department's Open for Business agenda is a bold strategic plan and policy blueprint focused on expanding trade and investment, unleashing government data for economic benefit, spurring innovation, protecting the environment, and executing these priorities with operational excellence as careful stewards of taxpayer dollars. Our bureaus are hard at work every day on behalf of American businesses and workers. For example, the International Trade Administration is charged with promoting the export of U.S. goods and services in foreign markets and ensuring fair trade and compliance with trade laws and agreements. Through its administration of the patent and trademark laws, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office enables the protection of new ideas and spurs innovation, creativity, and the development of new technology globally. The Economic Development Administration plays a critical role in fostering regional economic development efforts in communities across the nation. And finally, with a varied research portfolio, world-class facilities, national networks, and international partnerships on standards and technology, the National Institute of Standards and Technology works to support U.S. industry and innovation. As we understand the bill, H.R. 985 would establish the Concrete Masonry Products Board upon approval of a referendum by producers of masonry products made from concrete. The board would develop research and education programs as well as programs to promote concrete masonry products in domestic and foreign markets. Funding for those activities would be derived from mandatory assessments on manufacturers based on the number of masonry units sold each year. The bill directs the Secretary of Commerce to organize and hold the initial referendum, produce an order, appoint the board, and then would require the Secretary of Commerce to assume ongoing oversight and enforcement role. While the department supports the efforts of the masonry industry to coordinate research, education, and promotion activities for the industry, we have identified a number of questions or challenges to implementation of this program within the Commerce Department. First, although the legislation provides that the costs of the department's activities in carrying out this program are intended to be reimbursed using assessments collected by the board, it is unclear to us at this point how that process would work in practice. In addition, the department does not currently have the expertise, staff, or resources to establish and administer a checkoff program. Such a program office would need to be established and located within one of the department's operating units. There are no bureaus within the department that currently administer a commodity checkoff or similar program. Nor does such a program fit within the current mandates or mission of our operating units. And the oversight and enforcement responsibilities proposed by the bill, as we understand them, would be quite extensive. So an option would be for the concrete masonry industry to organize voluntary cooperative arrangements to encourage generic marketing, education, and research activities. We also note that other competing construction material producers might oppose the creation of such a program that could be viewed as unfairly favoring one type of construction material over another. This could lead to requests from other competing construction material producers to establish their own checkoff programs, resulting in an expanding number of checkoff programs that would be administered and housed within the Department of Commerce. I appreciate the committee's time and attention. I appreciate the invitation, and I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Chair, thanks. The gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes Mr. Rusco 5 minutes for your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Schakowsky, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss GAO's prior work on checkoff programs, and particularly some observations from two such programs, the Propane Education and Research Council, or PERC, and the National Oil Heat Research Alliance, or NORA. There are currently more than 20 checkoff programs for agricultural commodities. These programs allow industries to set aside a fraction of the wholesale price of these commodities to be used by the programs for a variety of purposes. Checkoff programs are typically geared toward increasing the success of the industries that fund them through activities including research and development, consumer education, and promotion of U.S. products domestically and abroad. For agricultural commodity checkoff programs, the USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service has administrative and oversight responsibilities and is reimbursed by the program's producer-contributor boards for these functions. Authorizing language for checkoff programs varies, but frequently contains guidance about the prioritization of activities performed by the programs. For example, Congress may specify a minimum proportion of program funds that go to research and development, consumer education, or other functions. Authorizing language may also prohibit certain activities such as lobbying. In 2010, GAO evaluated two such programs, PERC and NORA, that were authorized by Congress in the Propane Act of 1996 and the Oil Heat Act of 2000. These acts authorized certain activities, including research and development, safety training and consumer education, and placed restrictions on other activities, including certain lobbying activities. Under the authorizing statutes, DOE and Commerce were given certain authority to implement the programs. Congress also specified key procedural, administrative, and spending requirements to administer these programs. PERC's authority does not sunset, but NORA's has and was most recently reauthorized in 2014. Our evaluation of PERC and NORA found that some PERC and NORA activities appeared to meet the requirements of the acts, but certain other activities, such as activities involving Congress or politically affiliated entities, raised issues about whether they were covered by the Act's specific lobbying restrictions. We also found that neither Act provided guidance on what constitutes influencing legislation or elections, which made it unclear if PERC or NORA was meeting the intent of Congress. In addition, Congress had not specified what proportions of program funds would go to the three key activities. For example, PERC and NORA each spent a relatively small share of funds on research and development, 8% and 6% respectively, despite the fact that research and development had been a key area of congressional interest as the two laws were debated prior to enactment. Because the acts lacked specific guidance in these areas, it was unclear whether the programs were doing what Congress intended. Finally, we found that federal oversight of PERC and NORA by DOE, as called for in the acts, was limited compared to the oversight of agricultural checkoff programs by the Agricultural Marketing Service. Based on these findings, we suggested that prior to reauthorizing NORA, Congress may wish to, 1, specify any prioritization of activities that Congress intends to be undertaken, 2, specify a federal oversight role by requiring DOE to monitor and oversee the expenditures of PERC and NORA funds, and 3, to establish a specific enforcement mechanism and authorize DOE to refer any potential violations of law to appropriate enforcement entities. In its reauthorization of NORA in 2014, Congress took actions consistent with all three suggestions, thereby creating greater accountability and oversight for NORA. PERC, which does not sunset, however, has not been subject to these changes to date. I hope these observations are useful as you consider the Concrete Masonry Products Research, Education, and Promotion Act of 2015. GAO does offer assistance with legislative language if that is desirable. We have some of our general counsel who are very versed on these programs and would be happy to help if we can. Thank you. I will be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. We'll move on to the question part of our hearing. I'll recognize myself first for 5 minutes for the purpose of questions. Mr. Rusko, let me stay with you because on PERC and NORA, the two checkoff programs that you used as your examples, both within the Department of Energy, is that correct?
Yes.
So the money that is collected, where does that money physically go? Does it stay in the Department of Energy? Does it go to the Federal Treasury? Where does it actually end up?
So as far as the money that reimburses for oversight, I don't know the answer to that. I can find that out for you in the case of DOE. In the case of the agricultural marketing service, that money I believe goes directly to fund the FTEs that are used for that oversight and administrative activity.
But is that, okay, then that funding for the full-time equivalents for that activity, is that subject to an appropriation by Congress, or is that just a pass-through that happens in the agency without Congress being involved?
I believe that it's the latter, and I will get back and verify.
I actually would, yes, I would very much appreciate to understand how what the actual flow of the dollars through the agencies is. Ms. Herbst, you and thank you for your testimony. I mean, if I heard you correctly, I think did voice some questions about you are not currently doing this type of activity. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Let me just ask you this, and it's a little bit out of left field, and I apologize for it, but does the Department of Commerce, you're the Chief Financial Officer, is that correct? Do you prepare a spending plan every year which is submitted to the Committee on Appropriations?
Yes, we do.
Would you have that available for the committee, not necessarily this morning, but could you make that available to us so we could look at the spending plan that you submitted for this past year? How do you see this activity fitting into the spending plan as it's ongoing, as it's being administered this year? And what I'm particularly interested in is the same questions I was asking Ms. Rusko. What happens to the dollars that are collected? Are they simply dispersed by the agency, or are you required to come back to the Appropriations Committee for the allocation of those dollars?
Thank you for that question. Since we don't currently administer a checkoff program, I'm not familiar with the answer to that question, but we could certainly also look into that for our particular department's appropriations rules and get back to you on that.
Well, my interest in this is more than just cursory or even academic. In other instances, and having nothing to do with the checkoff program, but in other instances and other agencies, it does seem that there are monies collected that are then dispersed for activities that doesn't go through the appropriations process, and this bothers me because of our constitutional obligation that any funds that go to the Treasury need to be dispersed through an appropriations process. And I want us to be sure if we are indeed going to set up a new program, from a new de novo program, I want to be certain that it's done correctly and in accordance with all of the principles that the founders laid down for us in the Constitution, so that the people are protected by the separation of powers that was intended by the founders. And obviously, Ms. Herbst, you do voice some concerns. Let me just ask you: has the agency had any discussion about this, as to whether or not your agency is prepared to handle the collection and disbursement of money in a checkoff program?
First, I want to make clear we don't have a policy position on the bill, so our discussion of it has been around how we would administer the program should it become law. As we understand it, our role would be in implementation, helping to set up the program and set up the board in the program, and then it would be oversight and compliance and enforcement for our understanding of the bill. That generally would require expertise from our legal staff, financial staff, internal control staff, and while we haven't put together a detailed approach or plan yet, we believe it would include the need to have a program person who was familiar with the industry and promotion in the industry and so forth. So we have had that level of conversation.
Very well. I thank you for that answer. My time has expired. I may have one follow-up question for you before we finish. Mr. Cardenas, I recognize you for 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity to have this dialogue before the public. In its 2010 report on the propane and oil heat checkoff programs known as PERC and NORA, respectively, the GAO made some recommendations to Congress to improve accountability and oversight of the programs. Mr. Rusco, the GAO recommended that Congress specify the priority of the activities that should be undertaken by the board. Was the recommendation followed for either PERC or NORA as far as you're concerned?
Yes, for NORA, when NORA was reauthorized in 2014, Congress did specify that a greater proportion of the funds collected be spent on research and development, among other things.
Mm-hmm. And so far, has that adjustment seemed to prove the follow-through on that adjustment? Is it happening, or is it too early to tell?
It's too early, and we have not been asked to review it yet. But so if we do, we'll make that determination.
Okay. Do you think the concrete masonry checkoff program could be better if this bill clearly specified the priorities of the program?
I think we're neutral on that. It's the intent of Congress that if the Congress does intend for there to be specific guidelines, then it probably needs to be laid out explicitly. What we found was that with PERC and NORA, they spent over half of their money on consumer education, and within that bucket, there were a lot of activities that we thought might not even fit the definition of that.
Okay. Mr. Rusco and also Ms. Hurst, some have suggested that this bill specified that research on ways to improve concrete masonry products and training for builders and developers should be priorities for the board. Do you support the inclusion of a provision that would clarify that research and development and training are priorities for the program?
Again, we're neutral about what Congress's intent for the program is, but if that is to support that, then it might be prudent to state that explicitly.
So basically, if we write language in legislation and our intent is not written in that legislation, then that would give fungibility for any organization to not have to follow the intent. So basically, do you agree that if that is the legislative intent of Congress, then we should in fact put it in the bill?
It is what we found was missing in PERC and NORA, and then when Congress did reauthorize it, NORA, they did include that kind of specification.
Okay. So the question is to both of you. Along those same lines, for PERC and NORA, the GAO recommended that Congress specify the proportion of the assessment funds that should be spent on each activity. This bill, however, does not include such a provision, at least at this time. Do you support including this kind of language if that is the intent of Congress?
If it is the intent of Congress that there be certain proportions, then it would ensure greater certainty that was actually done if that was included.
So, in other words, if an organization is provided with opportunities and responsibilities, but if those responsibilities are not specific, then they in fact are not doing anything wrong if left to their own interpretations, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So being with what has gone on with PERC and NORA, and there's some criticisms of that flexibility and that not following the supposed intent that as some people have described, we should be more prescriptive in this bill if, in fact, we want the actual outlay and the actual activities to be more in line with what the intent is.
That's certainly what we found in the case of PERC and NORA.
Okay. So, again, absent specific language, for example, even PERC and NORA aren't necessarily doing anything wrong per se if one cannot point to specific legislative language that is prescriptive.
That's correct. We found that it was unclear whether what they were doing was actually meeting the intent of Congress, yeah, because the language was not as
well. In my 18 years of legislating, I can agree that if we are not prescriptive as legislators and we write legislation, then we can't blame anybody for not following through with the intent if the intent is left out of the language. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you very much. The chair recognizes Mr. Harper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for being here. And Mr. Rusco, if I could ask you a question. You just discussed that Congress should consider specifying the prioritization of activities it wants to be when you undertake a checkoff program. Is there a danger in being too specific to the point that we could limit the flexibility of a checkoff program to respond quickly and effectively to changes in the marketplace?
I think some checkoff programs provide ranges of proportions to be spent, so they're not rigidly specific.
Can you get too specific, though, that limits that flexibility?
I would imagine that that's possible.
Okay. Yeah. I'll yield back in the interest of time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Ms. Castor, you're recognized.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for calling this hearing, and welcome to the witnesses. And Ms. Hurst, I'm a co-sponsor of the bill, along with my colleague, Mr. Guthrie, and I want to thank you for expressing your general support. The Department of Commerce mission is to help American businesses, and a lot of these businesses are spread out all across the country. And my interest has been in, because this is an industry-driven initiative, it's going to be voluntary, but I hear the message from GAO and from Commerce on the need for specifics. I note that in the bill, it does provide certain caps that hopefully will address concerns raised by GAO. It says that 50% of the assessments paid by a manufacturer must be spent on promotion, research, or education programs in the manufacturer's geographic area. A lot of those terms are defined in the bill for greater specificity. In addition, the statute prohibits the use of assessment funds to influence legislation or governmental action, which addresses concern of the GAO as well in the other cases. And after the program's creation, administrative expenses are capped, cannot exceed 10% of the board's income. Mr. Risco, is that the type of caps on expenditures and a little more specificity that you are recommending generally?
I think when we looked at H.R. 985, in the context of what we found with PERC and NORA, with regard to the specificity, the language was more similar to PERC and NORA than dissimilar. So there was, let me put this a different way. There was less specificity in the original NORA authorization than there was in the reauthorization.
And then in the other law, the Congress, there was no reauthorization, so the Congress has not addressed that.
That's correct. That remains the same.
Great.
With respect to the other two things recommended, the way that 985 is currently written, with the provision that Commerce will review within 30 days certain activities and spending plans of the program. If they don't review it within 30 days, then it's deemed to have been approved. That's very similar also to what the original PERC and NORA language was, and is different than what the NORA reauthorization language is, which required DOE to perform administrative and oversight activities. Because prior to that, for some 13 years, DOE had not performed any of those oversight or administrative activities.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your input. I think that's very helpful, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes Mr. Guthrie.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the panelists for being here. Appreciate working with my friend from Florida, Ms. Castor. Mr. Whitfield was here earlier. I think he'll be here a little later. He has a constituent testifying in the next panel, so appreciate that. And as I stated earlier, this bill is important for small manufacturers of concrete block. And I'd point out the nature of the product is it's heavy, it's hard to transport over long distances, and in turn it makes it difficult to get bigger, so it's a lot of small businesses, and a lot of our communities, a lot of us have learned over the last couple of years. So an R&D program, it's difficult for a single business to establish a big R&D program, so it's important. And I know the Commerce Department, that's what they do, is move forward. So I appreciate you being here, and I completely sympathize and understand the questions when you're asked to get involved in a program you haven't been involved in before. I think it's fair to say we've not done this. There are a lot of questions that we want answers to, but I think working together we can make that happen. And I know that other agencies or other departments, the Department of Energy being one, has stood up boards in this kind of, and so there's examples of other successful departments doing this. And I'm sure the Department of Commerce will be willing, if this moves forward and the President signs it, to work with other agencies to make sure we move forward. If you'd like to comment on that.
Yes, thank you. We would definitely be willing to learn more, understand more, work with both the committee and with other agencies who have done this before to ensure that we discharge our responsibilities well.
And I'm sure the Department of Commerce also has other citizen advisory boards or those type of boards that are probably not a checkoff board, obviously not a checkoff board as you stated, but
that's correct.
But you certainly have worked in the area with other boards and moving forward. So as I said, I certainly sympathize and understand your questions, and I think all of us working together can make this move forward. And to Ms. Rusko, energy took the lead, and I think actually the other one was commerce and energy, but energy took the lead in setting up the program. I was just wondering if your research could provide any insights into how the oversight role was fleshed out between the two departments.
So I think that initially there wasn't much either between Commerce and DOE or collaboration between them. They were sort of just kind of passing on it. Since 2014, with the requirement that DOE set up enforcement and oversight activities, we have not looked at the program since then. So I can't really comment on how that's going.
And you mentioned the need for oversight and expenditure of funds, and understand the burden that this could put on a department. Would a third-party auditor kind of requirement or move forward? Would that be something that you would see would be beneficial?
That's another
thing. Take some effort off the agency?
Yes, that's another thing we recommended, and I believe was included in the 2014 reauthorization was the setup of a third-party entity to essentially monitor spending of all the widespread state and other, recipients of those funds, and make sure that those things were actually, the funds were spent on activities that had been approved. And then that entity would then report to the oversight entity, and therefore take some of the pressure off that.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate both of you being here today, and I appreciate it. I'll yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Bill Rockus. 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Mr. Rusko, the organizational structure and activities of the checkoff program vary. Based on GAO's observations of checkoff programs, is there a certain organizational structure that has generated more success than others?
I don't think we've looked at that question in particular, so we have not tried to compare all the different models and see how well they perform. Really, our observations are just about specifically about PERC and NORA, and how some of the language in their authorizing acts allowed, created some uncertainty about whether the spending was being done according to Congress's intent.
Last question. Are there recommendations that GAO has offered to agencies overseeing checkoff programs in the past that provide guidance on how to detect noncompliance with these programs?
We have done work over many years, looking at checkoff programs, and have made recommendations over time. The recommendations that we made in this most recent report in 2010 were actually matters for congressional consideration before reauthorization, rather than recommendations to the agency. But we had, in a previous report, recommended that DOE do more with its oversight role, and they had disagreed with that and not implemented that recommendation.
Okay, thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Brooks of Indiana. 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Prior to coming to Congress, I was at Ivy Tech Community College in administration. And at that time, I focused and led the school strategies aimed at workforce development. One of my greatest interests both then and now was creating a trained and well-educated workforce by providing them with the tools and the experiences they need to grow and succeed. And I know how much the masonry industry affects the state of Indiana. Wells Concrete Masonry has operated in the Fishers community for over 20 years, and in Pendleton, Indiana, it's benefited from Swackhammer masonry present since 1970s. Masonries are vital to revitalizing both the residential, public, and commercial development of our state and country. Unfortunately, the recent downturn in the masonry industry has hit hard. In 2013, USA Today ranked block masonry as number 5 on their list of top 10 disappearing jobs in the USA. It is essential for the future of our infrastructure and our economy that we reverse this trend. That's why I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of this bill. By providing the masonry industry the ability to raise funding necessary to support research, education, and promotion, companies will have the needed resources to successfully develop, implement, and manage programs needed to increase sales and expand markets. The bill makes strides toward a more prosperous America for Hoosiers, and I'm glad we're holding this hearing today, Mr. Chairman, so we can learn more about it. With that said, Mr. Rusko, I'd like to ask you, based on GAO's research, how have federal agencies overseeing checkoff programs validated or verified the eligibility of producers or manufacturers to participate in such programs?
Most of that work would have been related to agricultural checkoff programs, and I don't have a very comprehensive list of all the work we've done there. I could answer that question for the record if you wish.
I would be, because we often, when we think about checkoff programs, we typically do think of it with respect to agriculture products. And so I do think that would be helpful to know, and I also think helpful to know with respect to this industry how it would be done. Do federal agencies, if you know, that have overseen checkoff programs, do you know if they have an employee on hand with subject matter expertise on the affected commodity to help with the oversight and implementation, or do you know much about that? And if not, could we please receive some information at a later time?
For the agricultural products, the Agricultural Marketing Service has staff that are specifically designated as administrative and oversight personnel for those programs. They're reimbursed by the programs. They develop expertise and knowledge about the programs and the industries over time. So that body has a great deal of expertise and specific knowledge about the industries, and I think can provide very thoughtful oversight and administration. But it takes some time to develop that.
Well, I certainly hope that we learn from the work of previous checkoff programs to advance this. So with that, I yield back. Thank you.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. The gentlelady yields back. I believe we're going to have 2 follow-ups. One from Mr. Cardenas. You're recognized for 5 minutes for your follow-up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to take the opportunity to commend a business that's right in the middle of the largest populated county in the country, which is Angeles Block in LA County. It just so happens that it's in Sun Valley in my district, and it's serendipitous that that's where my father used to take me when he used to buy his block, when we used to make block walls around the neighborhood where I used to work with my father. But I just wanted to give a shout out to the Antonini family, it's been in their family for generations, and they happen to be the largest manufacturer and supplier of concrete masonry units in all of Southern California. And it's just wonderful to have the opportunity when I was a little kid to look up to my father and the former father owner of the business and listen to them transact, and for them to continue to serve the community for generations now, and for me to be able to give service back to them by being hopefully conscientious member of Congress trying to figure out how we're going to make this legislation good, and hopefully we can bring it to fruition so that the industry could get the representation it's asking for. So I just wanted to say thank you to Angeles Block for their generations of work. And with all due respect, it's not lost on me that when you look at the concrete jungle of Los Angeles with 10 million people, that's a lot of masonry over the decades that they've been one of the suppliers of. So I yield back. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, thanks. The gentleman yields back. I recognize myself. 5 minutes for follow-up. Along that same line, I would recognize the contributions of Acme Brick in North Texas. Certainly the best thing to have around your house, as I've known growing up, and every house I've lived in Denton County, Texas, has been indeed built out of Acme Brick. Ms. Herbst, I wanted to ask you, in your prepared testimony, you referenced the International Trade Administration. Is that part of the Department of Commerce?
Yes, it is.
And you note that it's charged with promoting the export of United States goods and services in foreign markets and ensuring fair trade and compliance with trade laws and agreements. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
So if this checkoff program were to proceed and if the monies were to actually go out, are there precautions that you must take or that the department must take in order to ensure that this is all done in compliance with the World Trade Organization, such that these checkoff monies are not seen as subsidies that would unfairly put our companies that are competing with other companies overseas?
That would be correct. We are responsible for ensuring that we don't do anything that would put our companies in conflict with international law, yes.
And then is the converse true? Are you also charged with looking at materials that may be subsidized by other countries that are then unfairly sold in our markets in this country?
Yes, the International Trade Administration does have an enforcement responsibility, particularly when companies bring forward and ask us to investigate a potential case of dumping.
Well, let me just, and this is really unrelated to what we're talking about this morning, but again, I so rarely get a chance to talk to someone from the Department of Commerce. I want to use the time wisely. It came to my attention in the district that there are people who manufacture and install granite countertops in housing and apartments, but builders can actually buy the finished and assembled product from a Chinese source cheaper than they can purchase the materials and build it. So the competitive balance therefore goes to the foreign company, and their question to me is someone looking out for their best interest if a builder can simply buy a pre-finished granite countertop from a Chinese source and there's no way that the guy who buys the slab and then employs the person to cut it and put it together, there's no way that they can be competitive other than, of course, obviously, the superior quality of workmanship that exists with every trade in North Texas and Denton County in particular. But is that something that your office would be in charge of?
Yes, I could offer that if we could work perhaps with your staff and follow up on that with them, we'd welcome that.
I would welcome that. I would like that very much. That concludes my question. Is there any follow-up question from either side of the dais? If not, that will conclude the questions for this panel. I want to thank both of you for participating today, and we are going to take the briefest of recesses while we set up for the next panel. Thank you very much. Committee will come back to order, and I do want to thank you all for your patience. Thank you for the quick turnover on the panel. We do want to try to get through as much as we can because there will be votes on the floor, and if possible, if we can conclude and not have to hold you over, that would be my goal. But I do want us to move into our second panel. We'll follow the same format of the first panel. Each witness will have 5 minutes for an opening statement, and then you'll have questions from the members. For our second panel, I want to welcome the following witnesses: Mr. Major Ogilvie, the General Manager for Ready Mix USA; Ms. Kate Offringa, President of the Vinyl Siding Institute; and Mr. Keith Wade, President of Ruby Concrete Company. We'll begin our second panel opening statements with Mr. Ogilvie. You're recognized for 5 minutes for an opening statement, please. Major, would you be sure that
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Major Ogilvie. I work in Birmingham, Alabama with the USA family of companies. We're a Cemex company providing building materials to the construction industries. I am involved in many parts of our business, primarily in our concrete masonry operations, but also with our cement, aggregate, ready mix, and other manufactured concrete products. Previously, I served as a General Manager for our concrete masonry business, Block USA. Today, I am here to testify as a representative of our U.S. concrete masonry industry. In October 2010, and after 2 years of study by members of our industry to determine the best way to better and more consistently fund important initiatives for our success and future, I was honored to be asked to lead our industry's effort to pursue the creation of a commodity checkoff program to support much-needed research, education, and promotion efforts for our products. And I am honored to be with you today and to address the merits of H.R. 985. I would like to thank Chairman Burgess and Representative Schakowsky for their role in making this hearing possible, and I would like to thank the lead sponsors of the bill, Representative Brett Guthrie and Representative Kathy Castor, for their leadership. Let me outline the nature of our industry and the role that our product plays in construction. Concrete masonry is not just an American industry, it is truly a local industry. Concrete masonry manufacturing plants are located in every state and territory in the U.S. While the marketplace continues to be challenging today, the vast majority of our some 350 U.S. concrete masonry producing companies remain as they have for more than 100 years as family-owned operations. Well over 90% of these companies are classified as small businesses, with annual plant sales revenue of concrete masonry products in the $2 to $3 million range. It was for industries like ours that commodity checkoff programs were originally created. And this legislation does not change the bid process, the method our products are sold in the marketplace. The jobs created by our domestic concrete masonry companies are not outsourced overseas. All our plants are truly local businesses that support high-paying local jobs and generate tax revenues for our cities, counties, and states. The concrete products we manufacture are used directly in the construction of local schools, homes, hospitals, hotels, apartments, office buildings, shopping centers, and municipal buildings, mostly within a 75-mile radius due to the weight and the transportation cost. And our local impact goes well beyond the manufacturing plant. Also within a 75-mile radius, we create local jobs and revenues for our raw material suppliers as well as our craft workers, the masons who install our products in the wall. Like other segments of the construction industry, business has been slow to rebound. Over the past 7 to 9 years, many plants have closed their doors and others are still fighting to return to profitability. A national study, thank you, Ms. Brooks, by CNBC says our industry is still among the 10 worst, hardest hit by the construction downturn. Demand for our products has declined and is still soft. Layoffs in our industry hit hard, directly affecting our local economies. So how do we turn it around? That is why we're here today. We believe this program will spur and stimulate jobs as well as create new innovations in our industry which will help both our construction industry partners and ultimately the American consumer. The public will benefit from successful implementation of this program through the construction of more energy efficient, more durable, more cost-effective, and stronger buildings. Like many of you, I have personally seen the impact of natural disasters and the devastation to homes and structures from the 2011 Alabama tornadoes. Research and education coming from this checkoff program will help minimize the impact on communities from these events and reduce economic losses by helping designers, owners, and builders to make better use of concrete masonry attributes. Our industry has worked hard to share the need for this legislation to our local congressional representatives. Over the last 2 years, hundreds of our industry members, including our suppliers and customers, have traveled to Washington to tell their story, meeting with over 500 House and Senate offices. We have hosted over 50 members of Congress and staff with plant tours in their districts. Our efforts resulted in 267 co-sponsors during the 113th Congress, and so far in the 114th, we have over 160. Our support is very bipartisan. Thank you for considering H.R. 985 and its ability to enable our industry to help ourselves, to create new, high-wage jobs here at home, and ultimately improve our communities. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, thanks. The gentleman yields back. Ms. Alfringa, recognized for 5 minutes for an opening statement, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Schakowsky, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today at this hearing on H.R. 985. My name is Kate Alfringa. I have the honor to serve as president of the Vinyl Siding Institute here in Washington. We're the trade association for manufacturers of vinyl and other polymeric siding and suppliers to our industry. Vinyl siding manufacturing is a $2 billion industry that provides quality manufacturing jobs in this country. Further, our industry is an important part of the overall vinyl industry in the United States, a $54.5 billion industry with nearly 3,000 vinyl producing facilities, 350,000 employees, 70% of whose products go into buildings and construction. On behalf of our association's 44 member companies, I want to convey the Vinyl Siding Institute's opposition to H.R. 985. We oppose this bill for 4 primary reasons, and again, I appreciate the opportunity to elaborate. Those are: 1, the concrete masonry industry is free to do collective research, education, and promotion of its products through its multiple trade associations. 2, federal sponsorship of a checkoff program amounts, in our view, to a subsidy for the concrete masonry industry. 3, this bill would create a non-level playing field for competitive products like those manufactured by the companies that I represent. And 4, creation of a checkoff program for the concrete masonry industry will set a precedent encouraging manufacturers of all sorts of products in our sector to seek similar assistance from the federal government. If you would, please allow me to address each of these points in turn. 1, the concrete masonry industry being free to do collective research through its trade associations. H.R. 985 is a bill designed, and I quote from the text, to enable concrete masonry product manufacturers to establish, finance, and carry out a coordinated program of research, education, and promotion to improve, maintain, and develop markets for concrete masonry products. To quote further from the notice for this hearing, the intent is boosting overall sales and production of a particular good without reference to a specific brand. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I respectfully submit that that is the role of a trade association, simply and well stated. We understand that the bill was introduced at the request of the masonry industry, in part because many firms in that industry do not belong to organizations that contribute to concrete masonry research. Free ridership is a problem common to trade associations in every industry. The challenge is upon us as associations to show value to our members and encourage their participation. The free ridership problem is not unique to the concrete masonry industry and does not, in our view, warrant government intervention. Number 2, federal sponsorship of a checkoff program amounts, in our view, to a subsidy for concrete masonry industry. As stated, the intent of H.R. 985 is to provide a federally sponsored mechanism that will assess the concrete masonry industry for funds to conduct research and promotion for its products. As competitors to that industry, my member companies oppose this bill, which will, if enacted, provide the concrete masonry industry with a substantial federally sponsored advantage over the research and promotion activities of our industry, thus providing the concrete masonry industry with an unfair competitive advantage, in our view, over the products and systems of our industry. The report accompanying S-429, an identical bill considered by the Senate in the last Congress, stated that the cost of the federal government to oversee the proposed checkoff program would be $4 million a year. That sum is greater than the annual budgets of many trade associations, including the Vinyl Siding Institute, And while H.R. 985, as drafted, provides for Department of Commerce recovery of administrative costs from the industry assessment, we do not believe that the total cost to the government can be recovered efficiently or effectively, and are therefore concerned that this program would not be cost neutral to the American taxpayer. And I would add that even if total cost recovery of government administrative expenses was achieved, the government sponsorship of the program appears, in our view, to be a seal of approval for the concrete masonry industry, and thereby constitutes an advantage for them, in our view. Number 3, this bill would create a non-level playing field for competitive products like those manufactured by the companies I represent. We understand that checkoff programs are common in the agricultural industry, and we would like to draw a distinction for you between that industry and the building products industry as it applies to this argument. In the eyes of the consumer, beef is generally beef and milk is generally milk, with no obvious differentiation between producers. That ensures the ease with which research and promotional programs can be funded and implemented without causing competitive disadvantage to any producer. That is not the situation for the building products industry. There's a host of differences between concrete masonry and other cementitious siding products, vinyl siding, and other types of cladding for buildings. The inherent differences in our products create real competition between our categories within the broader building products industry. Federally backed promotion of one type of building product over another would amount to the federal government picking a winner in the eyes of the consumer, is our concern. We believe the market should do that. Finally, number 4, creation of a checkoff program for the concrete masonry industry will set a precedent encouraging manufacturers of all sorts of products in building construction to seek similar assistance from the federal government. That's a slippery slope. In conclusion, the Vinyl Siding Institute and its members oppose H.R. 985 for the subsidized advantage it would give one competitor above all others. We ask that you consider the adverse effect passage and enactment of this bill would have on our industry, and we urge you to reflect on the dangerous precedent the legislation would set that could lead to any number of industries requesting similar checkoff programs. Thank you once again for the opportunity to be heard today, and I'd be happy to address any questions you have for me at the appropriate time.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. Chair recognizes Mr. Wade. 5 minutes for your opening statement, please.
Good morning. It is a privilege to testify in front of this subcommittee today on behalf of my company and others like mine. My name is Kent Wade, and I represent Ruby Concrete Company of Madisonville, Kentucky. I believe our company is like many others within the concrete masonry industry. We're family-owned and we're small. It began in 1869 and has been family-operated for 146 years. We currently have 3 generations from our family working at Ruby Concrete Company, and our business is recognized as one of the oldest in Kentucky. I am proud of the role our company has played in our region's history. We supplied the masonry products used to build our local schools, fire stations, home centers, grocery stores, and other facilities that our community uses every day. We've also supplied public works projects including roads, bridges, courthouses, and judicial centers. In addition, our products were used to build barracks for the 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell. We employ 16 people directly and create jobs both upstream for our vendors and downstream to our customers. Our business is small, innovative, resourceful, and aggressive. During the construction recession, we reinvested our capital to create one of the most modern concrete products plants in the U.S. The construction materials industry is changing, however. Companies like mine struggle to compete with other building materials that have different demographics. We welcome competition, but we seek a mechanism to level the playing field for our commodity industry. If we manage our resources wisely, Ruby Concrete can invest in modern equipment and support our employees. But a company of my size simply does not have the resources to educate, research, and promote our commodity products throughout a broad-based market. We belong to associations that perform good work on our behalf, but I believe a commodity checkoff program is necessary if we are to collectively invest more fairly and support growth that will benefit all of us in the industry. Many of you know our product as a gray cinder block, but it is actually a very versatile design tool. Producers like mine use a wide range of natural, manufactured, and recycled aggregates that are readily found throughout the country. Concrete blocks are strong enough to support tall buildings and protect families from flying debris in hurricanes and tornadoes. They are non-combustible and prevent the spread of fires in buildings. They also survive forest fires. Reinforced concrete masonry protects people and assets in earthquakes and wind events. It also shields against explosions and bullets, which is why our military uses concrete masonry to build mock cities in order to train soldiers in urban assault and terrorism defense. Concrete masonry is environmentally friendly. It does not rot or mold, and it's not subject to termites. It has terrific thermal mass properties that reduce the amount of insulation needed to meet energy codes. It can be made in a rainbow of colors to allow creative designs that integrate texture and imagination. For example, our company was commissioned by a university to produce a purple concrete block that was used to build a signature wall on the campus of a school with their certain colors. These properties, design qualities, and uses resulted through many years of work and testing. We've learned from each other and built on shared knowledge, but the old system of learning and communicating is ineffective in today's world. Technology, speed, and resources are necessary for our industry to advance, and we currently cannot keep up. We're losing ground, we're losing producers, and we're losing local jobs. I have spoken with many concrete block producers across the country, and we agree that our industry needs a new approach to support education research that fosters new technologies and broad-based promotion. Our industry will leverage the outcomes of these investments to support the construction of higher performance, more sustainable, and cost-effective building solutions. That is why we urge the committee to pass the Concrete Masonry Research, Education, and Promotion Act, H.R. 985. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to addressing your questions.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. And that concludes the opening statements of our second panel. I'm going to yield to Mr. Guthrie first. 5 minutes for your questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding in that precedent. I appreciate that very much. Appreciate all three of you to being here to testify, particularly Mr. Wade from our beloved Commonwealth. Welcome to Washington today. My first question is for Mr. Ogilvie and Mr. Wade. And isn't it true that the bidding and building process associated with concrete masonry construction would limit the impact on the resulting cost of the building?
I would agree with that statement that between the building process or the bid process and other costs associated with building any structure would basically eliminate the assessment upcharge. The assessment by design is designed to be so tiny as to not affect the overall cost of a building. And so we would not see that as
well, I'll just ask you a follow-up, and then you both can answer. I know that you've been active in D.C. quite a bit on this issue, and so your customers obviously know you've been here talking about assessments and on the industry and so forth. Has your customers reacted to this and concerned like, Major, you're up there doing this, is going to add cost to us? What are your customers saying about it is my question.
They have. They recognize the need that our small industry has. And just like Kent was expanded on at the end of his testimony, we have got to do something for our industry to help transform it and get it into a modern technology that meets the marketplace needs. We absolutely got to do that. Our customers recognize that. Our suppliers recognize that. We have enjoyed great support from both our suppliers and our masonry contractors coming up and telling our story to members of Congress.
Thank you. Mr. Wade?
And Representative Guthrie, I would concur with Mr. Ogilvie in that it truly is recognized as a job bill in that our customers need support in the education and research of this commodity product so that they can continue to build their businesses and we can work together to do that.
Okay, in the text of the bill, we talk about funding research in your industry. Could either of you two elaborate on the kind of research that you envision would be used by the industry?
I'd be glad to address that. One example is actually going on at University of Louisville right now, and they have a center there that is focusing on the benefits of thermal mass, which I addressed in my statement regarding energy codes. Concrete masonry has terrific thermal mass properties that, when used correctly and designed correctly, can create a much more environmentally friendly building, and with all the LEED credits that are being sought after in the design community, that could add to the benefits of the buildings today.
Okay. You have a comment on that, Mr. Ogilvie?
Mine are more in the marketplace, Representative. We have needs to help our customers, the designers, the builders, the developers, realize the value of our products. One of those, and some of the low-hanging fruit of investments we will make, design software in the marketplace today. This is an item that would be $3, $4, $5 million to purchase, and would take that amount to implement over the course of time. But during the outreach of our industry's effort, we have learned that software today is out of date. So one of the low-hanging investments we would make early on is investing in updating our software, because we have found that in the marketplace, because we don't have updated software, the economics against our products are working against us in a pretty significant way.
And understand, construction practices are different throughout the country. We have a vast continental country. What you build in Florida, what you build in Birmingham, what you build in our mountains, it might be different if you're on the coast of Florida versus in our beautiful mountains. So how does this bill ensure that the funding raised will support local initiatives, given that we have vast differences?
Well, as it was pointed out a little bit earlier, in the act, in the bill, 50% of it has to be spent in the region that it's raised in. So that will guarantee that. And looking at the investment model we're putting together, the regional requests will be held first, followed by our state, regional, and national. They'll be done in that order, so as to give the state, the local area, the top priority for the best investment, which in our business, states are, in the demographics of states, are very important.
Thank you. My time has expired, and I yield back. Thank you for your testimony.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes Ms. Schakowsky. 5 minutes for questions, please.
I think people listening to this debate would wonder how much of taxpayer dollars are involved in this legislation. And so I wonder, Mr. Ogilvie, in promoting concrete blocks, in promoting your industry, are there taxpayer dollars, or is the industry providing the funding for the promotion?
Well, good question. First of all, as the legislation states, we're responsible for all the costs of the government, both administrative and personnel. We believe that the legislation, just because of the nature of our industry, meaning very concentrated in a local standpoint, will create additional economic activity, which will increase the tax revenue both for all layers of government, city, county, state, and federal. So we believe it will be a tax advantage, a tax increase as far as tax receipts go.
I think that's really important for people to understand, that the taxpayer is not on the hook for promoting your industry. And Mr. Offringa, do you see anything in this legislation that would prohibit yours from asking for the same kind of program?
No, I don't.
No. So we actually have heard from a number of building material industries that they may want to seek that. I think it's important also to make the point that this is not to the exclusion of, but it's focused on an industry that has done a lot of homework and a lot of organizing and a lot of thought into a piece of legislation, and we may very well see others that come forward.
Thank you. I agree with you.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, that's all I really have to say. So I'm going to yield back my time. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back to Chair. Thanks. The Gentlelady. Chair recognizes Mr. Harper from Mississippi. 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to each of you for being here. And, of course, Major Ogilvie, it's good to see you again and reflect on all the years I watched you as the All-American running back at Alabama, 2 national championships and 2 MVPs and lots of big plays. And pretty special deal there. We'll have to tell us some Bear Bryant stories later, but no. Hey, you remember the first time I saw you a couple years ago, I said number 42 right off the bat, so remember that. So we're glad to have each of you here.
Thank you.
Mr. Wade, how would you address concerns that the assessment will disproportionately impact smaller concrete masonry producers?
Disproportionately impacting them.
Do you think there's a problem, that there'll be a problem for the smaller concrete masonry producers with this assessment? Or you think it's something that they'll be able to manage?
Everyone will be able to manage this. The amounts that we're looking at as far as the assessment is concerned, as Mr. Ogilvie pointed out, is very small in relation to the product cost and or price. So it's not onerous in any way.
Thank you. Ms. Alfringo, if I could ask you a question. Looking at your website, it lists all of your siding competitors to vinyl. I didn't see concrete masonry on that list, so why today is it a primary competition concern?
Thank you. That's a very good question. I appreciate the opportunity to clarify that. Our concern is that while this program is designed for concrete masonry and the product you see there, that the promotional efforts will spill over into general promotion of cement and cementitious products. And fiber cement cladding is a major competitive threat to vinyl siding, and that's a big concern of ours, is the spillover effect, where a program designed to promote concrete block could end up promoting concrete and other cementitious products, generally speaking.
Okay. If I could ask if either Mr. Wade or Mr. Ogilvie have a response or care to respond to that competition issue, or shall I move on?
I can speak specific. I can't speak to other potential checkoffs or checkoffs in general. I can only speak to ours. But what our checkoff will cover: concrete masonry checkoff, concrete block. It would not relate with competition within this industry.
Okay.
If that was your question.
Okay. Thank you. In the interest of time, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Castor. 5 minutes for questions, please.
Well, I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Schakowsky, for holding this hearing today. You're responding to local small businesses all across the country that oftentimes don't have a big voice here in Washington. So I want to thank you for taking the time out for this committee hearing today. And I'd also like to thank my colleague and co-sponsor, Brett Guthrie. He is a good friend. He's been a pleasure to work with on this bill, and his staff as well. Representative Guthrie and I have introduced this bill together for the last 2 Congresses, and we have, I'm really pleased that we've garnered so much bipartisan support. Last Congress, we had 267 co-sponsors, and this year we already have 159 co-sponsors, including almost 30 of our Energy and Commerce colleagues. This bill is an industry-driven bill that will give concrete masonry businesses the opportunity to decide whether or not they want to institute a commodity checkoff initiative. If approved, it allows the concrete block industry to assess itself to pay for research and advertising at no cost to taxpayers. The concrete masonry industry is made up of primarily small local businesses. Most block producers are small and local due to the huge weight of concrete block and the high cost of transportation. That's why they're so spread out all across the country. And virtually every congressional district is home to at least one producer and multiple masonry contractors. One of the reasons this bill and this initiative got my attention is that we're seeing an increase in the number of extreme weather events all across the country. In my home state of Florida and throughout the entire Gulf Coast, we're particularly sensitive to tropical storms and hurricanes. Mr. Ogilvie, you mentioned the tornadoes in Alabama. You don't have to look back in the news pages or news reports to see reports of fires, floods, and I think that promotion of this industry is very important to making sure our structures are sturdy, that they can withstand the increasing intensity of these extreme weather events. Can you, Mr. Ogilvie, can you elaborate on the role concrete masonry could play in creating a more resilient construction environment? How could this bill allow the concrete industry to better research and advertise products that can better withstand volatile weather conditions?
Thank you, Representative Castor. That is a big subject for us that requires, particularly on the research and the education part, resilient construction and the benefits that it can. That's a gigantic play for this industry. One of the areas that we will work toward and continue to work toward with this concrete masonry checkoff program. Wind resistance is a true value of our product. It offers the highest wind resistance toward tornadoes or hurricanes of products that are out there, and we will work more to not only conduct that research that will be required, but also work within the colleges, the universities to educate the designers and the designers coming out in the marketplace to help us further resilient construction.
You know, in my home state, we've had a real crisis after the active hurricane season of 2004 relating to property insurance. And I also see this initiative as a benefit for homeowners and commercial property owners all across the country. If they have sturdier structures over time, they're going to be able to access property insurance at more affordable levels. And Mr. Wade, do you have a comment on how we can promote resilience and stronger structures through this concrete checkoff initiative?
Well, I think you pointed out the major areas, not only through the building side, but also through insurance and that type. But the biggest thing that this is going to do is allow us to innovate and create stronger properties in our product, as well as be able to communicate that to the design community and integrate that into standard building practices. We've manufactured concrete blocks in some ways the same way for a long, long time, but technology has advanced to the point where we want to take advantage of that. And we feel like that if we can get the funding to be able to do the research and put that technology to work for our industry, we can create better products that create better buildings, and in turn, it's better for the consumer and for all of us.
Thank you very much, and thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for calling us here.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. Gentlelady yields back. The Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Brooks. 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to turn the attention back to the jobs in the industry. And Mr. Ogilvie, do you know how many jobs are supported by the concrete masonry products industry today, roughly?
Yes, ma'am. The Department of Commerce does not distinguish between brick and block when they do their census, and these are 2012 numbers, but there are roughly within brick and block operations about 15 to 18,000 were the numbers that we looked at and we can estimate, and that's 2012 numbers.
And do you have any sense as to whether or not you expect the number to grow with the establishment of a checkoff program? How will a checkoff program assist with job creation?
Yes, ma'am. Number one, this downturn, this recession has hit our industry particularly hard because we are family businesses, and to strive through that has been particularly difficult. We don't have access to large public capital. But the recession is not going to fix the challenge, the transformation that we see as an industry we need. We need to modernize our industry, be able to get up to transform it with new innovations, as Kent said, but we need to be able to transform it, like I was sharing a little bit earlier, with design software that helps our product be more competitive in the marketplace, but also bring it up to code and allow us to change code sooner than we've been able to do in the past, because the design codes, the design systems that are out there are penalizing our product in a wall system. This block is $1.20, $1.45 nationwide. And we're talking about a penny assessments and enough that will help us to put a design system that in the wall, this is anywhere from $12 to $15. We could save 100, 200 times that with updated design systems alone.
And thank you.
Did that make sense?
Yes, and thank you for bringing that block for demonstrative purposes today. It's helpful. Mr. Wade, can you share with us what are the main challenges facing the growth of the concrete masonry industry today? What are kind of the biggest challenges that you see that will serve as obstacles, that do serve as obstacles, to strengthen your position in the market?
Well, we've got a good product that's time-tested. The problem that we face as producers is that I individually cannot put the resources in to innovate and research in ways to improve the product and put it in the marketplace today in a viable way. So that is why we seek the checkoff program, is so that we're not individually trying to do that we collectively as an industry can use technology for our benefit.
Can you explain, though, how an improved product through R&D and through checkoff, can you explain how you believe that could increase job creation in the future and increase the strength of your industry, and how we can connect those?
Yeah, again, through technology, I can learn how to build a better block. And in that process, I can communicate with designers and who are seeking those better performing building products. And if they are looking at and specify that product, then I create jobs because I'm feeding the building industry with what they're needing, what they're wanting.
Thank you. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma. Mr. Mullen, 5 minutes for your questions, please.
I was just fixing to tell Ms. Brooks she was using some big fancy words to describe a center block a while ago. I have absolutely busted out numerous of those and actually installed a lot of them too. And I do appreciate bringing a visual aid. That's what we call that. Oh. Right. It helps explain it. Yeah, I know. We understand. I'm a plumber. So anyways, Ms. Offringa, I was wanting to kind of visit with you just a little bit because as a business owner, I mean, I have competition that enters in every day. We have companies ranging from plumbing all the way to banking and even a restaurant, which that's a whole animal in itself. And competition is something that comes in the market every single day. I mean, as a business owner, if I'm concerned that someone's going to get the competitive edge, it's not that I go out and I try to keep that competitive edge from happening. I go out and make myself stronger. And so I'm kind of more interested in your perspective on why we're trying to incentivize safety. What's a better product? What's a better way to do things? What is there a better option out there? How can we increase safety? How can we save money from the consumer? If your product is out there and it's able to compete, but there's always going to be a need for your product. And so I guess I'm kind of trying to get your point of view of how do you think this is going to put you at a negative disadvantage?
Thank you for your question. We're not afraid of competition. That's what we do, the industry I represent, and keep doing it, and that's the American way. But our position is that a government-backed checkoff program would appear to be a seal of approval on a particular type of product in the buildings industry and have spillover effect, as I said, to other types of cementitious products.
But isn't that a far reach? I mean, you're assuming something that we don't even know. That's not even the point of this legislation.
Well, the position we're taking on it is that they're free as an industry to do all those things, and they should do them. They should strengthen their industry and do R&D and promote their products. They should do them, and that they're free to do them through their trade associations, and that's what we do.
But we've helped, as a government body, we've helped a lot of industries innovate. We've also hindered a lot too. I get that, but this is kind of a step that we tried to supposedly create an atmosphere in Washington D.C., which this is kind of counterproductive, but we're supposed to be creating an atmosphere for entrepreneurs to thrive, an opportunity for them to be able to succeed. Lately, through regulation, you've probably heard me rant on this before, we haven't. But this is one that we are. And I understand where the association is taking a stand, but I'm having a hard time agreeing because I've been in construction my whole life. This is something that I could understand a point of view if it wasn't just making an assumption. And you're assuming that this is going to put the industry at a negative advantage, but can you see the positive in it too?
Well, those are our concerns. We're happy to compete on a level playing field.
No, I'm not saying I'm saying can you see the positives? You personally, can you see the positives in this?
Of government-sponsored programs that...
No, I'm talking about specifically what we're talking about here today.
I understand checkoff programs and what they accomplish in the agricultural industry, and I think there's a difference when you start to apply them to manufactured products, and that would be something new for Department of Commerce. We have concerns about the impact and how it would work out, but if it's something that you decide to do, then we think that lots of other industries are going to come ask you for the same thing. And
let me ask you, well, is there a way that we can help your industry? Because I'm all about creating an atmosphere for industries to thrive in. Is there a way that we can help your industry then?
Well, if this is a successful program, maybe we'll be back next year and have a different conversation then about these types of promotional.
Which is my point. It's okay so often that we help as long as we're helping me, but not others. And if it was an opportunity came along for us to help you, you would be okay with that. But what if these guys here wanted to oppose that? Do you understand my point? We're here to help, and we want to create an equal playing field. I'm not wanting to pick winners and losers. So if an opportunity comes up, Ms. Offringa, come to my office. Let's see how we can work with you, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. I yield back.
The Chair thanks the gentleman, and Chair will recognize himself then for 5 minutes for questions. And I do want to thank all of our members who stayed with us this morning and heard from a very informative panel. I want to thank Mr. Mullen for educating me about gas cans. Over the 4th of July holiday, I had the opportunity to buy a new gas can and found that I was unable to work the new nozzle that is required by the CPSC. So when he referenced the fact that sometimes we actually work at cross purposes to the advancement of industry, I feel your pain, or I felt your pain. So I got the nozzle off the old gas can that had a hole in it and switched out, and it just leaked a little bit, and I'm sure I probably damaged to the ozone layer more than the CPSC intended for me to. Mr. Mullen, I wonder if you would introduce your guest to the committee.
I am very privileged today to have my second oldest child, which I have 5. My second oldest child would be Andrew. As adults, so often we get busy in our world and we don't actually show our kids what we're doing. This job, as we all know, takes us away from our family all the time. And the last thing I want to do is think my kids to grow up thinking that this took me away from them. So I appreciate the chairman for allowing me to have him in the hearing today, because if you ever want to see me cry like a baby, get me talking about my kids. So thank you.
So understood, and I appreciate the opportunity to perhaps do that someday. And Mr. Mullen, I just might further ask as we get to the conclusion of our hearing today if Andrew would like to take the chair and adjourn the subcommittee as we conclude that would allow him to actually participate in the hearing. Before we get to that, though, I do have just a few observations, Mr. Ofrinka. It seems like I learned at a very young age from my mother that if you build a better mousetrap, the world will be the path to your door. Was she correct about that? That we make a better product and people are going to want our product. And if I understood your testimony correct, you're concerned that we may interfere with the mousetrap school of economics that was related to me by my mother. I mean, am I understanding your concern correctly? We're talking about tilting the competitive advantage to a product that is not vinyl siding and doing that with a government program. And I'll be honest with you, I share that concern. I do have to wonder if that is the correct place and function for the federal government to be involved. I guess the question I would have to the other witnesses is, what prevents a voluntary program? And yes, you're free to take money from your members and use that to the advancement of your product. I guess the trade association was the term of art that's used. What prevents that from happening now? What is it about your industry that makes that not a viable strategy?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you for the question. Our industry has worked for many years trying to voluntarily put together innovation and advancements. The problem with our industry is that, as it's been well stated, there's a bunch of us that are spread out, and so it's hard to collaborate and get together, even through associations, to do that. But more importantly, the dollars that it takes in order to accomplish meaningful innovation and research is not something that we can do just individually or just a few of us. It needs to be a collaboration of all of us. And the checkoff program is well established, not necessarily in this department, but is well established, and it meets the needs of other commodity industries, and we feel like that we fit well within the guidelines of that.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry, Major, please.
And I'm going to give you more of the history. First of all, we studied voluntary checkoff programs. I'm going back to 2008, 2009. We studied grants. We actually came up here and met with a number of Congresses. But the seed was that we recognized as an industry we needed to be able to better fund, with all the transformation, all the needs going on in the construction industry, for concrete block to remain competitive and a viable product. So we studied those very quickly between grants and voluntary. Voluntary can help you in a short-term issue, topic type thing. But in terms of the long-term need that our industry felt like we need to move our product into the future, we didn't feel like voluntary programs were an effective way to do that. That's based on the history and study and voluntary programs that have been in place.
Well, and I appreciate that. And I get the fact that your industry is widely dispersed over geographic areas. Your products are heavy. They're hard to transport.
Right.
But it also seems in the day of the Internet that some of those problems are perhaps manageable. And I don't know. I mean, these are just observations. I always worry about setting up a new government program. So I do share some of the concerns that were expressed today. And Ms. Ofrinka, you used the word subsidy, and you heard me talk to our commerce witness about the concern if a subsidy could be seen as an unfair competitive advantage and whether that would get us into difficulties with the World Trade Organization. I guess my only other observation is if we set up a checkoff program, I hope that Commerce is prepared to do the necessary oversight to make certain that other industries are not adversely affected, and that certainly we remain in compliance with all of our obligations under the World Trade Organization. Seeing that there are no further members wishing to ask questions, I do want to thank all of our witnesses for participation in today's hearing. Before we conclude, I would like to include the following documents to be submitted for the record with unanimous consent. Statement for the record on behalf of the Mason Contractors Association of Greater Chicago. Statement for the record on behalf of Backbrook Masonry, a joint statement for the record on behalf of Featherlight Building Products and the Acme Brick Company, and a letter from the National Association from Home Builders. Pursuant to committee rules, I'll remind members that they have 10 business days to submit additional questions for the record. I ask the witnesses to submit their response within 10 business days in receipt of the questions. I do advise members that there is a vote on the floor. Mr. Andrew Mullen, if you will take the chair and read the last sentence that I have underlined there, and then strike that gavel very hard.
Without object, the second.
Without objection.
Without objection.
The subcommittee is adjourned.
The subcommittee is adjourned.
There you go.
All right.
Thank you, Martin.